The United States has entered full-scale bombardment of the Houthis in the Middle East. At the time of this video being made, we're over 32 days of constant bombardment on the group, and it looks like that's only going to ramp up. Today, we're going to talk about the different assets that are in the Middle East, what assets might make their way to the Middle East that aren't there yet, and what the Trump administration's plans might be as we enter over 4 weeks in this conflict. What's the strategic implications? What are the strategic goals? Where do we go from here? And how will the specific tech from the US Air Force and the US Navy play out as this conflict evolves? President Trump is quoted as saying, "I will no longer allow this band of pirates to threaten and attack United States forces and commercial vessels in one of the most important shipping lanes in the world." And he said that the US will continue striking the group until they no longer pose a threat to navigation or US personnel. As you can see, the US is deeply committed to this fight, and all the different assets moving to the Middle East show me that the US does in fact mean business, specifically with the two carrier strike groups being in the Persian Gulf at once. While they are strategically there to deter Iran and to help with Iranian nuclear negotiations, they are turning and burning and flying daily combat missions. We haven't seen anything on this scale in decades. Having two carrier strike groups in the region with 90 plus aircraft each, E-2D Hawkeyes, EA-18G Growlers, F-18Es, which are air superiority F-18s, F-18Fs, two-seat Stryker aircraft, in addition to F-35C stealth strike aircraft. The air wings flying off of these two carrier strike groups are providing air power in a way that hasn't been seen before in the Middle East. The way that they downed these Reaper drones was by using Iranian missiles, the Saker 358 SA-67 missile, infrared search and track. Some may even be adapted to have radar guidance. At the end of the day, this missile has been brought to them by Iran. Iran has been delivering this missile through Kuwaiti waters, and it has given the rebels, a small group of pirates, the ability to take down Reaper drones, which shows that Iranian-backed militias in the region are posing a serious threat. So what could evolve from the Houthi rebel situation? Let's talk about the US forces in the area and the different threats that they might be going after. So looking at the map of the Middle East, you can see that there are multiple US bases in the region. We've got US controlled bases in red, and those bases have been operated for over 15 years. Personally, I've flown into multiple of these bases and executed combat missions myself. These bases are going strong, and these are all places where F-16 CJs, F-15Es, and A-10s could be based. Likely, Djibouti at this moment could be housing A-10s from the 124th Fighter Wing from Boise, Idaho, which have been deployed recently to the Middle East. That's not confirmed, but likely they will be somewhere where they can execute strikes into Yemen without aerial refueling. And then if you look at Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE, these are also all options for F-15Es, as the Saudis would likely create corridors for the US to fly combat missions into Yemen to go up against the Houthi rebels on the daily. And then in orange, we have other sites with US military presence scattered throughout Iraq. And Iraq is specifically important because, as you can see, that tan color shows that it is a territory where major Iranian-backed militias are active, just like Yemen. So this entire conflict could evolve into us going back into Iraq and taking out militias like ISIS or other militias that have involved with Iranian influence. And then additionally, you have Hezbollah and Hamas in Lebanon and Palestine. So you have the ability of the US to target these different Iranian-backed militias by having all this air power in the Middle East. And the Middle East itself is turning into a giant powder keg as these Iranian-backed militias feel empowered. They feel like they're getting attention, and they think that this is their moment. However, Iran may be pulling back support. They've said that they will be pulling back support from the Houthi rebels. We'll see if that's actually true. Because of the Iranian nuclear talks with the United States, they want it to look like they are not wreaking as much mayhem in the Middle East as they actually are. Iran's main tactic has been deception for decades. They'll say they're doing one thing while they're doing another. They'll say they're not developing their nuclear program while they're developing another one. So the forces that are already there that are constantly bombarding the Houthi rebels in this 4-week plus campaign include the two carrier strike groups, the Harry S. Truman, the Carl S. Vinson, with over 90 aircraft each. E-2D Hawkeyes, EA-18G Growlers, F-18s, F-35s, they're all at the ready and they're constantly flying combat missions. But in addition to that, we now have the A-10 Warthog Hawk, which can fly missions against Iranian fast boats, Houthi fast boats, and drones. The US needs sorties. The US needs aircraft that can fly multiple sorties per day. So having numbers at this point is extremely important, with all these different Iranian-backed militias possibly popping up, with the US now having to play a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole as these militias pop up and try to target US forces in the region. And it's clear that Iran's support of the Houthis has really boosted their ability to project force into the Red Sea. So we're essentially trying to counter that. And with a surge of military power, the US seeks to cut the head off the snake. When I was flying combat missions, during my combat deployment, we had a surge in fighter jets. We went from 12 jets in our squadron to 24 jets. This dramatically increased our lethality, although it did increase our costs. So the economic cost of warfare is something that must be considered as well. As the US goes further into this entanglement in the Middle East, it's clear that we have the tech to get the job done. Just look at the MQ-4C Triton drone. This drone is a beast of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The Navy operates this drone essentially 24/7 along the Yemeni coast. It operates above 50,000 feet, and it can be armed with specific weapons. It can be armed with HARMs, it can be armed with JDAMs, and this drone is nothing to mess with. It has some of the most sophisticated avionics and sniffer technology in all of the US military. So the US is going to have the eyes in the sky to support different fighter groups, the carrier strike groups, and is going to be able to put bombs on target whenever necessary. But we must ask ourselves, how deep do we get intertwined into this conflict in the Middle East? And I think it's worth us asking, is this just a case of history repeating itself? And how do we keep from getting drawn into a quagmire in the Middle East that the US really doesn't want to be a part of, on the scale in which it might take to completely squelch all of these militias? Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to Pasha Yusuf of Tripoli in 1801, expressing a desire for peace and commerce with the Barbary states. The Mediterranean Sea had US ships being attacked essentially daily. Thomas Jefferson simply wrote a letter saying, "We will pay you. We will give you money from our treasury to allow safe passage of these ships." But the demand for money grew, and even despite being paid money, lots of these pirates continued to attack US ships. So Thomas Jefferson elected for military force in the end, using the US Navy to destroy many of these pirates. So is this a game of whack-a-mole where the US can actually cut the head off the snake? Or is this just something that the US will have to do continually for decades to come? Ultimately, that's yet to be decided. So having done many strategic plans for the US military and the US Air Force, I think the surge plan is actually a good one. Striking the head off of the snake is what needs to be done to these pirates in order to reestablish a baseline. I don't think these pirates will ever go away. Iran will likely continuously supply arms to these pirates, but if you continually whack the head off the snake and do what's called retrenchment, where you don't have massive amounts of boots on the ground, hopefully completely limited boots on the ground, maybe just some special forces operators, some JTACs, some joint terminal air controllers, but you have the ability to cut the head off the snake, which is destroying the petroleum, oil, and lubricants, and destroying any surface-to-air missile systems and fast boats that might be operated by these Houthi rebels. So having F-16 CJs, F-15Es, and A-10s, having the sortie count to continually schwack the head off the snake is what's going to be most important to the US right now. I would expect to see this conflict to continue on for at least 6 months at a surge level. And then hopefully after those 6 months, we can begin to scale down forces in the Middle East again. But I would expect to see at least one carrier strike group in the Middle East for the foreseeable future. What do you think? What do you think will evolve out of this conflict? Thanks so much for watching, guys. It turns out that only 11.3% of you are subscribed to the channel. If you would subscribe, it would help me grow the channel vastly. We've got millions of views here on the channel. So if you subscribe, in the next few months, we could have over 1 million subscribers, and I could do updates and videos like this for you essentially every day. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We'll see you in one of these videos that'll pop up right here. We'll see you on one of those videos. That's basically the biggest compliment you can give me. Thanks so much. Have a great day.